From The Conversation, this is Politics with Michelle Grattan.
Treasurer Jim Chalmers describes Tuesday's budget as the most important and ambitious budget in decades, with its changes to the tax arrangements for housing, capital gains and the treatment of trusts. But this budget is contentious not just for the actual measures in it, but for the election promises that the government has broken in its making. Jim Chalmers joins the podcast to explain and defend his fifth budget. Jim Chalmers, you've said the budget's new Working Australians tax offset provides the first broad-based tax relief specifically targeted at working people, that it's a new architecture for the tax system. Can you just walk us through this briefly?
Yeah, well, one of the big motivations of the tax reform package in the budget was to try and better align the way that we tax income derived from work versus income derived in other legitimate ways. We think the tax system is out of whack. And that's part of the motivation behind the changes we're making, the 30% minimum in trusts and capital gains. But it's also this new architecture that we've set up, which basically means we can increase the tax-free threshold for people but limit it for their labour income. And that gives us the ability to dial that up at some future point, or a successive government to dial that up at some future point, providing that tax relief for labour income, which doesn't then extend into other parts of the system.
So you've emphasised that this new architecture will allow future changes to the balance between the taxing of assets and work. Do you plan to continue to rebalance the system in this way?
Well, having just handed down a budget with more tax cuts in it, I'm reluctant to kind of canvass future budgets, but certainly the intention there is to give future governments the option to provide tax relief the usual way, which we've done 3 times, cutting rates and thresholds, or cutting taxes specifically for workers via this new architecture, the Working Australians tax offset. So it's about providing options. Obviously, I think I've demonstrated an enthusiasm to return bracket creep and cut income taxes where we can afford to do that. And this will provide another way in the future that governments can do that if they wish.
I understand your reluctance to look to the future budgets when you've just given one, but nevertheless, you made that point specifically. So it did sound as though you were saying, well, I plan to do more later.
Well, certainly we are in the cart for more tax relief when the budget can carry that, when the budget can afford that. We've made that really clear. Even in some of the budget documents, we made it clear that one of the benefits of getting the medium-term fiscal position in much better condition is that it will provide room down the track for more tax relief. So we've cut taxes 5 different ways. We've only been here 4 years. Of course, we'll look to cut taxes more in the future when the budget can afford it.
Now, I understand the arguments for changing negative gearing and capital gains tax in the context of this rebalancing, but let's talk about improving the chances for young people buying homes over the next 4 years. From these specific changes, the budget forecasts a very small reduction in the increase in house prices, but also a reduction in the number of houses built. There's also a small rise in rent. So how much better off do these changes make it for house buyers in those years, in the near term?
So very important question, Michelle, because some of those modelled outcomes that you're referring to refer very specifically to and narrowly to the tax changes and not the housing package in its entirety. And so once you look at all of the housing policies in the budget that we released, we expect there to be about 30,000 additional homes. And when you're building 30,000 additional homes, you will put downward pressure on rents. In addition to that, there's a lot of national competition policy and other policy that we're doing with the states, which is about speeding up approvals and having more land release. So that could mean tens of thousands more homes as well. So all told, the budget in its entirety has a positive impact on housing supply. That means downward pressure on rents. The numbers that you're quoting are accurate, but they're only about a small sliver or a sliver of the housing policy in the budget.
But of course, the measures to increase infrastructure and competition and so on are conceptually quite separate from the tax measures, which there's a lot of talk about, which the focus is on.
Well, one of the reasons why we have this big emphasis on supply is because that's still the main game. And so in the budget, maybe conceptually you could separate those things, but in effect, in impact, the impact of the budget on housing supply and the Treasury's estimation is about 30,000 extra homes. And that's deliberate that we're doing multiple things at once. Supply is still the main game when it comes to challenges in the housing market, but the problem doesn't end there. It's also about the composition of the market. We are increasingly worried that it's too hard for younger people to get a toehold in the market. So we can do both things at once, build more homes, as well as try and level the playing field for first home buyers.
But surely it is at least contestable that the tax measures by themselves don't do all that much for young people.
I'm not sure about that. I mean, the 75,000 extra first home buyers, I mean, you're right that that's over a 10-year period. Not all of those over the next 3 or 4 years, but that's a meaningful difference that we're making. And we're doing that because we're recognizing that the tax system right now locks too many people out, particularly young people, by incentivizing a lot of people into certain kinds of investments. And so by fixing that, we're hoping to level the playing field. You would know, as we do, about first home buyers fronting up to auctions and being outbid by people who've already got half a dozen homes. And that's a problem in the housing market. So we can deal with supply and we can deal with first home buyers at the same time in the same budget. And that's what we're trying to do.
Critics have made the point that many young people now, or at least some young people, are using the share market to try to accumulate some capital in saving for a deposit, and the changes to capital gains tax will reduce that advantage. What's your reply?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, it depends on the types of shares and the marginal rate of the investor. There are a number of variables there. But to give people a sense of the issue here, ever since the big change was made to capital gains tax in 1999, we've had a big distortion in the market. We analysed the average outcomes over a 20-year period, and what we discovered was that the capital gains tax arrangements that we are seeking to change basically on average over that 20-year period, overcompensated investment in established homes and undercompensated investment in shares or in other types of property like units. And so that distortion is an issue that we're trying to remove from the system. It may be that shares become more attractive once the changes wash through the system. But again, it depends on the kinds of investments and the marginal rate of the investor.
Just to turn to the NDIS and the savings there, the budget has a saving of $36 billion, but you could argue that this is an inflated figure because it takes into account a potential blowout quite recently, and that the figure is much more in the mid-20s. And also you have this 2% growth rate over the next 4 years, average growth rate, which is highly problematical. Don't you feel that the NDIS savings are particularly vulnerable?
Oh, not necessarily. I mean, I think they are. We have recognised that the NDIS has kind of strayed from its original expectations, including expectations of how much it would cost. And so we've had these huge blowouts over a long period of time. And these reforms that we're putting in place are about trying to make that spending on the NDIS more sustainable. I know that there's a view out there, I know that you share it, Michelle, that these savings will be hard to realise. They will be difficult, but they're doable. We've spent a lot of time making sure that these reforms are ambitious but also realistic, and it will take a lot of work by a lot of people and not just one level of government to realise the kinds of savings that we've put in the budget, but they are robust numbers that we spent a lot of time grappling with.
You've emphasised the drama of how the Iran war changed the budget preparation, and things went from one point to another point very quickly. And you've also put in a scenario of things going bad, inflation going to 7%. So how worried are you about the whole thing blowing off course?
Oh, I still lose a lot of sleep over developments in the Middle East is the truth of it. And that's because we have no say in when the war will end or how long the consequences will linger for. And so when you're trying to put together a budget I thought the best way to go about it was to give you a sense of the kind of scenarios that we're grappling with. Like any decent government or organisation, we run through a range of scenarios, a range of contingencies. And so what I asked the Treasury colleagues to do is to put one of those more severe scenarios in the budget so that you could see the sorts of things that we're working through. But you asked me, am I still really worried about it? I am extremely worried about it. The consequences in our economy from the war in the Middle East are already serious, and they still risk becoming severe.
On productivity, you have an impressive agenda in the budget, but we've seen often promises of productivity changes and yet they haven't been delivered. What's different?
I think the big difference in this productivity package is just how broad and ambitious it is. And it's been a very, very long time, decades, since somebody has taken this productivity challenge in our economy as seriously as we have in this budget. A lot of ministers have worked on it, effectively about 15 different ways that we're trying to shift the needle on productivity. But overwhelmingly, it's about building stuff quicker, more easily. It's about getting compliance costs down, more than $10 billion a year saved in compliance costs. And it's about attracting more investment. We've had some green shoots in productivity at the end of last year, but nowhere near enough to sustain the kind of higher living standards that we want to see in our economy, and that's what motivates the productivity package. In any normal times, that productivity package, if it was on its own in a budget, would be seen as a budget in itself, and that's because it's really broad, it's really ambitious, it's really important, and it's a bit of an obsession of mine.
Finally, on broken promises, we've heard your explanation, but would you regard this as a new routine for election promises? And are you concerned that breaking promises in such a cavalier way does undermine people's trust in the system when we're seeing populists like Pauline Hanson exploit this lack of trust, this declining trust?
Well, I mean, first of all, I understand obviously that people are focused on this element of it. And some people, not you, Michelle, but some people are focused on this because they don't want to engage in the substantive part of the issue. People who want to defend the status quo want to focus on that rather than the status quo itself. Not accusing you of that, of course, Michelle, but some people are doing that. Second point is the comments and commitments that we made at the election genuinely reflected the policy that we had, the overwhelming focus on supply. Now, the big choice that we had to make in the budget, to be upfront with your listeners, Michelle, is a choice between doing something easier, which would have been to leave it untouched, but something which became increasingly clear to us wasn't the right way to go, because the longer we left it, the more people would be locked out of the market. We didn't want to leave it to some future generation to fix this problem, which is intensifying. And so we took a decision which is hard in political terms. We will pay a price for it in political terms, I think. But what matters more than that is to get the substance of it right. And so if it's a choice between getting the politics right and the substance wrong, or the politics difficult and the substance right, I'd rather do the latter. And that's what we chose.
Jim Chalmers, thank you for joining us. And that's the end of our post-budget podcasts. You can also listen to Shadow Treasurer Tim Wilson up on the site. Thank you to my producer, Ben Roper. Goodbye for now.
Production by Ben Roper. Theme music by Lee Rosevere. The Conversation is a not-for-profit media organisation. Sign up to our daily newsletter for evidence-based news and analysis, including articles from Michelle Grattan, or listen to more of our shows wherever you get your podcasts.
What are you going to have? Can I have 2 pieces of mullet, please, Pauline?
From a fish and chip shop in regional Queensland
We are in danger of being swamped by Asians.
to the heart of Australian politics, this is the unlikely story of the country's most controversial minor party.
Are you xenophobic? Please explain.
For 30 years, One Nation and Pauline Hanson have been ridiculed, dismissed and shut out. Now, no one's laughing.
One Nation continuing to surge in the polls.
Dramatic surge in support for One Nation.
I'm back.
This is The Making of One Nation from The Conversation, and you can search for it wherever you listen to podcasts.